Matt Taibbi actually had an interview with Chris Cuomo. I did not know Chris Cuomo was still like a thing, but apparently Chris Cuomo has joined another network, um, news network. I think this is only internet network. I have to double check, but he's joined another network, and he also has like his own Cuomo project where he's interviewing guests. It's really interesting to me how he could bounce back so quickly after having these allegations against him of sexual harassment. Isn't that interesting how people who have money and they have networks and things like that, how they can just easily just bounce right back like that and put his face right back on the screen? Anywho, Matt Taibbi had this interview with Chris Cuomo, and there's a couple of things that were discussed here. And one of the things that Matt Taibbi talks about was the difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And they talk about the midterms and so much more. But I want you to hear what they say at this point right here.
That has to be, but now once you built that into polling, now I use polls for what they are. We want to talk about sentiment. I'll use polls all day long. People tell the truth about what bothers them. It's not like, what do you want Matt Taibbi to talk about? I want him to talk about only the most serious things. I have no time for frivolity. Oh, that's good, because he's got this interview with Kim Kardashian about what ended her marriage with Ye. Oh, I've got to watch that, though. That I got to read. Here's what I'm voting on. It's good. Who am I voting for? I judge it by a third. And I think that we learned that in 2016. I knew nothing. I knew that I had gotten his celebrity and the impact of celebrity wrong about halfway through. And I knew that he was running against the perfect person for something impossible to happen about 2/3 of the way through. That these guys do not want to vote for her. These people in my life, these small business guys and trades guys and successful guys, big fishing boats. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have, a bunch of letters after their name, but they got big degrees from the school of life and hard knocks, and they've done well. And they were not going to vote for her. And that's right. When I started changing how much I was pushing, how bad that campaign was.
But you have to notice at that point in time, Chris Cuomo was still on CNN, and he had that primetime show on CNN, which at one point was one of the most watched shows on that network. And so there was only so much that he could say at that time. Think about it. You're on CNN. What he just told you right there, I didn't hear him say that on CNN. So he knew, and that just goes to show you, I told you the narrative is controlled. He knew people that were in his life and his space that were like, no, I'm not going to vote for Hillary Clinton. But he could never say that on CNN. He couldn't say what he just said here. That shows you how the narrative is controlled. I don't even know. I'll have to check. I don't know if they brought Matt Taibbi on CNN either. I don't know if they've done that.
Lose to Trump if you screw.
Oh. We'll take it back a little bit here.
People tell the truth about what bothers them. It's not like, what do you want Matt Taibbi to talk about? I want him to talk about only the most serious things. I have no time for frivolity. Oh, that's good, because he's got this interview with Kim Kardashian about what ended her marriage with Ye. Oh, I've got to watch that, though. That I got to read. Here's what I'm voting on. It's good. Who am I voting for? I judge it by a third. And I think that we learned that in 2016. I knew nothing. I knew that I had gotten his celebrity and the impact of celebrity wrong about halfway through. And I knew that he was running against the perfect person for something.
Oh, I just have to add, Big Mad Crab. I didn't know. Someone sent this to me. I didn't know this interview happened either.
Possible to happen about 2/3 of the way through. That these guys do not want to vote for her. These people in my life, these small business guys and trades guys and successful guys, big fishing boats. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have, a bunch of letters after their name, but they got big degrees from the school of life and hard knocks, and they've done well. And they were not going to vote for her. And that's
Right.
when I started changing how much I was pushing how bad that campaign was. Because you only lose to Trump if you screw it up, because you have abandoned people's fears and needs so profoundly that out of desperation, they will choose somebody just because he seems to hate the right people.
Exactly.
And that was a lesson we continue to learn. Your piece in Substack, where you talk about the progressives and their letter, tell people about why you decided to cover it the way you did and what it means to you as a metaphor story.
Well, first
By the way, this conversation probably could never happen on CNN.
of all, I've been hearing from people in Congress all summer that there was an effort to try to think about what the end game is in Ukraine. All right. I think most people in Congress understood that they weren't going to politically be able to stand up and say, well, we need to stop sending money to Ukraine for arms. But there was a segment of people who were worried that there was no policy endgame for the White House. And so they wanted to begin that conversation. And this was the genesis of what became the quote unquote peace letter in the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They had 30 members sign it. As often happens in Congress, they didn't release it for months after it was signed. Within 24 hours after it was signed, all the members who signed it were denouncing themselves for all the things that we were talking about previously on the show. It was the Twitter blowback primarily, and then there was some nut-cutting stuff that went on behind the scenes politically, where the members, particularly Premier Jayapal, the leader of the caucus, were basically told, you're never going to work in this town again if you don't renounce this letter. Pretty soon, not only is there no letter, they retracted it, which is extraordinary. It never happens in Congress. But the progressives were articulating a new casus belli for Ukraine, which to me, it's just an extraordinary story about the power of social media and the power of media generally. You had people who actually who believed one thing and made a political calculation and were so overwhelmed by the media response that they turned themselves completely inside out within 24 hours.
That's the problem with playing small ball. When you play small ball and you're fighting for an ever shrinking electorate, and that's why, when people ask me anything about emotional motivation in terms of my work, I'm just frustrated. I know that everything should be better than this. And it's not because I'm some kind of romantic or idealist. I am absolutely the true definition of hard bitten. I just know that in terms of what works for me in my life, I can't do bitterness, anger, revenge. Those things don't work for me. They don't allow me to do and be what I want to do and be.
Chris is saying a lot about himself here.
I won't. I'd never move past it. I used to joke with people, and I was telling the truth. I didn't even really realize it. When they'd be like, oh, well, this person, said this shit about your, fill in the blank, your father, your brother, you, whatever. And I'd say, man, if I made all my decisions in this business based on who had done something I don't like to my father or my brother or my family, I wouldn't have anybody to talk to. I got to let those things go to do the job, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to do something for other people. So my frustration
is true, Notori. It's like a totally different person.
is we have abandoned the majority. We have abandoned the majority in our politics, and they're fighting off this shrinking electorate. And that's why the right is as absolutist as it is.
But part of the problem too is for Chris Cuomo is that, and when he talks about we abandoned the majority, what he has to consider as well is the fact that according to the exit polls, and especially according to the polling at that time and the exit polls, the majority of people wanted health care for everybody. The majority of people wanted the policies that Bernie Sanders was running on. But people like you, Chris Cuomo, you smeared Bernie Sanders and you said those policies were too extreme. And so, it's just, who is this person? Like, who is this guy? Like, he did not talk like this on CNN. So this is Chris Cuomo admitting to you that he knew what the majority wanted, but he couldn't say it on that network. What does that tell you about mainstream media?
Has to be. They can't lose anybody. They can't. They have to cater to people who are fringy folk. They can't win otherwise.
I disagree with that. I think that's wrong, but go ahead.
No. Let's take it one by one. Why is it wrong? Which part of it is wrong, by the way? Wrong how?
Well, I think the conventional definitions of left and right are all over the place now. And it's very difficult to make pronouncements about left and right in the same sense we would have used those words 20 years ago that make any sense at all right now.
Agreed. We wouldn't have used left and right 20 years ago. We said Democrat and Republican. We only talked right when we would talk far right. We never even mentioned far left. But now it's all I talk about is left, right. Continue.
Right. Well,
but Democrats are not left. See, that's liberal. That's not left. That's not left. This is why it bothers me. It bothers me when he makes that assumption there.
We would have said liberal and conservative 20 years ago, maybe, but those terms don't mean the same thing anymore either, right? So, but just to take an example, there are plenty of people on what we would call the right who are Trump supporters, who are isolationist about this Ukraine conflict. The overall electorate, 57%. Is in favor of opening some form of negotiation with Russia. Now,
that's a good point to note. The overwhelming 57% want some type of negotiation.
That is completely taboo in major media. Some of those people are on the far left, or like the old anti-war crowd that you might have seen marching against the Iraq war in 2002, 2003. Some of these people are new kind of neo-isolationist Trumpers, but they're all over the place. I mean, there are big clumps of people who are for all sorts of things that, that are different from our previous assumptions. That there's a tremendous hostility, for instance, to expertise on Wall Street, right? Like that's a new thing. We didn't have that pre-2008 where right wingers would have been described themselves as being really angry about what the Federal Reserve was doing, right? This is a new thing. So all this stuff is just difficult to define. Like you never know whether a thing is really a fringe opinion now or whether it's actually a majority opinion and it's just not reported that way.
I agree. If you look at it policy preference by policy preference. Now, the reason that I lied over those things in a sentence about us is because we don't fight on those battlefields very often. It's just about who's good and who's bad. Put me in and I'll stop Taibbi from doing what he's doing. I don't really have to voice where I am on the different policy positions. Smaller government, less taxes, less involvement, stay out of my house, stay out of my school, we're good to go. What I'm talking about is on the right, the reason that you would have real Republicans, okay? Like the Republicans that I married into 21 years ago, almost to the day. They would not deny what January 6th was about. They would not shit on our election process without really good proof. They would never condone trying to decertify an election. They would never condone the blind eye towards so many things that Trump and his administration represented that are anathema to conservatism. But
parties change. And this is the thing, like the Democrats of 50 years ago were not the Democrats that we have now. They're not the party of the working class anymore. If we want to go a little bit further and we want to talk about this FDR Democrat that some people refer to, none of those things were passed in my lifetime. We want to talk about Social Security. We want to talk about Medicare. None of those things were passed during my lifetime and even during my adulthood. So the Democratic Party has also changed, not just the Republican Party. And I wish Chris would express that more as well, is the fact that how did the Democratic Party go from being this party of the working class per se to this party that embraces Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo? How did it go from that? So I think both parties have changed over time, but I also think at the end of the day, once corporate money got into politics, we were all pretty much done. That should have never happened.
It has to happen today. So those guys are lost. My in-laws and all that, now they just say they just vote for the person. You know what I mean? They're in their 80s and they're beautiful people. They're real conservatives. They're Catholics. They're new to this country. They're both.
I don't know how Matt did this, but this interview is an hour and 8 minutes. I don't know how Matt sat through this for the whole time. Because I didn't start from the beginning with good reason. But I don't know how he sat through this the whole time. Chris Cuomo's going on about his family and saying that they're Republicans and that they're good people. Why do people feel the need to do that? Why do people feel the need to do that when they tell you that someone in their family is a Republican? Why do they feel the need to say, but they're a good person? Like, why do you need to tell me that? So he's going on all about himself, me, I. I don't know how Matt hung in here as long as he did.
First in here, they're both born somewhere else, and they're real conservatives. But their votes, that's not who it's about right now. The votes in that party that they need to win dictate what you're going to hear. Ted Cruz is a smart man, okay? He plays ridiculously small ball all the time. Defund the IRS. That's what I'm talking about. These positions that play to fringe mentality because of a shrinking electorate. That's what I'm talking about. You are correct. I don't know what the labels mean anymore. I don't know what they mean. I don't know who is what they say they are. I don't know. I'm talking about only in terms of the electoral game.
I would describe it more as, instead of left and right, I think the real dividing lines now in America are insiders and outsiders and educated and uneducated, right? Like that's the most predictive thing. Does a person have a college degree? There's an overwhelming likelihood that person is going to be a Democratic voter. Do they live in a town where the income is in the top tax bracket? They're very likely to be Democratic voters. In fact, the numbers are ridiculous. Like of the top 50 congressional districts by wealth in this country, 41 of them now are held by Democrats. All of the top 10 are held by Democrats.
That right there goes to show you how much the party has changed. And he's right. And we see this every election, right? When we go over the stats and we go over the data that shows you how people voted and what their background was. And notice that the college voters, or most of the college voters, tend to vote Democrat. Also, there's the income bracket as well. So that right there lets you know the Democratic Party, they stopped trying to find a way to please working class people. And they started to find a way. Let me see how we can please some of these upper middle class suburbanites. Let's see how we can please some of them. So that right there, again, that confirms how the party has changed over time.
So education and wealth are very predictive of being in one place, but there's this tremendous anger toward the people who've run this country for a long time. And it's people who feel like they've been excluded, people who feel like they're not part of the consensus. They don't feel part of the expert class. They don't feel part of the decision-making class. And Trump appeals to those people. Mm-hmm. I think what he basically promises them has very little to do with policy. It has to do with which people are you going to infuriate by casting a vote for me.
That's right.
He is very astute in gaming all that out. And Ted Cruz, on the other hand, I think is just not as good at that game. He's tried to be a traditional Republican in a world where that doesn't really make sense anymore. It's that creature isn't there.
He called it a creature. Listen, let me tell you something else too. Ted Cruz is boring. Ted Cruz is so boring. Have you listened to Ted Cruz?
You have to be thinking in terms of much grander themes if you want to win the election now. I thought for a while that this was going to happen on both sides of the aisle, that Sanders was going to win in 2020, and you would be left with basically two outsider archetypes duking it out in politics. But really, when the Democrats won, when Biden won, we're still left with this insider versus outsider thing, which I think is just it's the reigning metaphor for American politics now.
It's so interesting. I'm old enough to recognize paradigm shifts, right?
Yeah.
So when I was 20, the idea that the Democrats would be the rich and the super educated was nonsense. The Republican was the guy in the suit with the cigar in his teeth, driving a Lincoln. That's your Republican. And the Democrats are the working man and woman and the new ethnics and all that stuff. It was Mario Cuomo. That's who he was, right?
Right.
The best of the worst, Pop used always to say. You know what I mean? That's what I am, the best of the worst. Nobody wanted to take him seriously, give him a chance. Now it's completely reversed. And we have this added factor onto it, which is this hatred of success, hatred of wealth and of the wealthy. I thought that was the American dream. You talked.
Now he's going back to his CNN talking points. He's like, now we have this idea of the hatred of the wealth, the hatred of the wealthy. So did you listen to anything that Matt said in this entire interview? I told you guys, it's actually a long interview. I didn't start at the beginning. So did he listen to anything that Matt said in this conversation? Of course, there is going to be this disgust. There's going to be this type of, I don't want to say hate, but this disgust with the wealthy when working class people and poor people have been stomped on their whole life. Of course, that was going to happen at some point. Listen, Bernie Sanders gave it a voice, right? He was the mouthpiece. He was the one spreading the message. But where do you think it came from? It came from people who had already been through it. It came from working class and poor people that were so tired of being stepped on. All Bernie did was take their frustration, channel that shit, and put it on a microphone and put it through a campaign. So of course you're going to have people that are going to be upset with wealth and the wealthy. Because if you have all these people in the country at the bottom and you have very few people at the top that hold so much wealth, of course there is going to be frustration. Chris Cuomo has a problem with that because Chris come from money too. Let's be real here. I mean, Matt Taibbi, he's come from well-to-do too. Because I know about his background as well. But I think the difference is he gets it. Chris doesn't. So here comes the CNN Chris coming back.
Everybody about what they want. Once they get past what they think are the right answers about freedom and opportunity, they want money. They want enough money to do what they want to do, how they want to do it, and not have to do things that they don't want to do, and to do for their families and their kids. That's what they want. That's why they come here. That's why they work their asses off, is for that chance. And there's a difference between hating wealth and hating the powerful. There's a difference. But
no, no, there isn't. There's a difference between hating wealth and hating the powerful. It's the same people. The people with the wealth are the powerful. What are you talking about? That doesn't make it. See, he wants you to separate the two. There's no separation, no, because money equals power. So wealth equals power. There's no separation here. Yes, you can be pissed at these people. I'm here to let you know it is okay to be pissed off at Bill Gates. It's okay to be pissed off at Jeff Bezos. It's okay to be pissed off at Warren Buffett. It is okay to be pissed off at these billionaires, including Elon Musk. It's okay to be pissed off at these billionaires because you know why? They have concentrated so much wealth. And let's be real, you don't become a billionaire. You don't get there by always doing the right thing. You don't get there without exploiting people in some way, shape, or form. If we really want to go there. So forget what Chris just told you. I'm letting you know the wealth and power are connected. They are one. Wealthy people are powerful. Chris just don't want to admit that because then he'd have to admit some of his own shit.
See that, and I see people playing to it. Everybody needs a hard luck story now, where they can't be that like, yeah, I went to Princeton, and then I went on Wall Street, and I made a shit ton of money, and now what I'm doing is this. There has to be, but my mother was a butcher's daughter, and it's like, well, what is that about? Why? I thought we just wanted to come here, give everybody a fair opportunity, and see what happens. The ability to succeed or fail on your own merits. But now everything is us, them. You're right. The lines are shifting, which is why it's so important to have perspective from somebody like you to kind of make people ask themselves why things are how they are. I think your podcast is going to do very well. I think the Substack is going to do very well for those reasons.
I think Matt knows that, Chris. I don't think he needs you to let him know how his Substack or his podcast is going to do. He kills me when he says that I thought everyone was supposed to come here and get a fair share. Do you know the history of this country, Chris? Everyone like who? Everyone like you? Because it definitely wasn't for sure for people like me. We're going to end it off with this.
And I think the fact that people don't know, yeah, you get beat up as a righty a little bit, but the right doesn't want to own you either. So, that's pretty good. When they start saying they love you, then you got a problem.
Right.
Kyrie Irving is going to wind up on the Timberwolves if he has Ted Cruz come out and say, leave Kyrie alone. Then he'll have a problem. Right now, it's okay to have people mad at you when anger is the only commodity in the business. Now, you mentioned earlier a stat that maybe you have certainly over a majority of Americans say it would be nice to see a negotiated settlement. I'm not surprised by that. I'm surprised it's not higher for the simple reason of, well, doesn't everybody prefer peace to war? And isn't how they all end? Unless there's like a decisive victory, which we almost never see anymore, you negotiate something to leave. Why do you think it's not happening?
Well, this is
No, Chris, I don't know why you're surprised about that, because networks like the one that you were a part of haven't been giving people the true narrative about the war to begin with. So that number probably would be higher if mainstream media had been telling people the truth about the conflict from the very beginning, from the get-go.
This is the ultimate win-win situation for the Pentagon right now, and for the donor class. I mean, I've done a ton of stories about military contracting over the years. This is the ultimate for them. You have an open-ended conflict with a legitimate, well-armed foe. You have a local population willing to fight them to the death, right? And it's basically an unlimited market to sell weapons to, right? So go around Washington and ask if anybody's interested in finding the end to the situation. Politically, you're just not going to find a whole lot of will around there for coming to an end to what makes a lot of donors happy.
How much of it is money and how much of it is righteous indignation? I mean, you talk to the Ukrainians. Ukrainians want a lot more weapons. They don't have the money to buy them. But they say they need a lot more given.
But let's be realistic. Ukraine is not going to conquer Russia. They're not going to march on Moscow. That's not going to happen.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. Thank you for saying that. Thank you. That is not going to happen. And anyone who thinks that's going to happen, and some people do because they only been listening to mainstream media, if you think that's going to happen, you're being naive. That is not going to happen. Meanwhile, we've given them billions and billions of dollars out the door. To do what? To accomplish what?
Just want to get them out of their borders. Now, do you think that should have to happen, or that should be a precondition to terms of negotiation with Russia? Should they have to leave areas that are not theirs?
That question is a little bit above my pay grade. I think you could start negotiations somewhere south of territorial discussions. And that's why I think it was important. Nancy Pelosi was in Croatia last week giving a speech in Zagreb, which to a group of people who are committed to retaking Crimea for Ukraine. Now that's tantamount to announcing that you are in support of Russia vacating Ukraine, the Crimea. That's going to be a non-starter for Russia. Like, however you think about that, that's a pretty powerful signal to them. So, you know, I would start with other things. Like, are there other things we can talk about before we get to the territorial questions? And I think there are. Like, there are probably two big issues with Ukraine. One of them is the question of NATO expansion and neutrality with Ukraine. I think the two sides can talk about that much more easily. Then you get to the territorial questions, which are much harder. There's no question about it that neither side is going to like any of the options that involve giving ground there. But I think you can talk about the one before you talk about the other. I also think there's been a lot of poor reporting on this issue that has made it difficult to talk about.
Like,
that's right. I have to stop there. I'm sorry, you guys. I do have to stop there. If you do want to see the full interview, like I said, it is long. And I did watch the whole thing. So I had to watch Chris Cuomo twice. So I'm a little. But if you want to see the full interview, it's called Matt Taibbi Full Interview, the Chris Cuomo Project. Check that out. But I could only listen to so much of Chris. So I had to stop it right there. We are going to go into Bad Cookie said no, thank you. Sorry. It is really long. It's long. Like